This tutorial is about the line art process for all three of my characters. The process is essentially the same for all three of my characters, but I always tend to start with the first character that I drew, and I do the same when I colour them as well. So that means I'm starting with the electric character. This whole process took about 2.5 to 3 hours for all three characters. So I did do the line art over, I think it was about 3 sessions of that I could actually sit down and do it. So as you can see here, I am literally just tracing over my original paper sketch. And I do actually make a few changes, particularly to the electric character towards the end, but I'll outline some of those a little bit later on. The important things to remember when I'm tracing over my line art is making sure that I'm doing the different characters on different layers, and sometimes I even do different parts of the body on different layers. It just makes things a lot easier if you need to go back and correct stuff later on. Not so much with the line art, you need to do different parts of the body, but definitely with the colouring. I do tend to do different sections of the character's body on different layers, but during the line art stage, one layer for each character is usually more than enough. It always tends to take me a little while to find the right brush tool to use. At the very beginning I did do a little, you probably didn't notice because it was going in fast forward, but I did a few strokes with different brushes to try them out at the start, and when I found one I like, I tend to stick with it for the whole line art. I don't tend to change the brush size that much during the line art. Mostly when I come to the face I might make it a bit smaller, but generally when I'm doing the line art, and particularly in this case because the line art that isn't actually part of the final image, it's just merely a starting point. At this point in time, I did sort of try and look at different ways of having his hand there. I wasn't quite happy with his hand at that stage, but I did end up leaving it the way it was in the end. On his hands, the electric bolts were quite tricky to colour later on. When you've got line art, you've got a clear definition of each section of the body, but when you're having to blend the line art in to the colour, some parts can get quite tricky. So when I come to that later on, I'll explain that a little bit better. I just did a little bit of resizing and manipulating with the free transform with his electric bolt there. I did sort of play around with his hair, his electric dreadlocks there. In the end, they were not that defined at all. I kind of just used the colour to make the definition of the dreadlocks, but having the line art there in the beginning did give me an idea of where to blend the colours, so it wasn't a waste of time in the end. I do tend to periodically turn off the background layer just to see how my line art is coming along. It's hard sometimes to know whether or not it's coming up effective enough when you've still got the original trace, the original drawing underneath. So I do tend to turn it off and on just to make sure that everything's looking okay. I don't tend to try and get too much detail with the line art, once again because I knew I would be blending it in with the colour later on and it wouldn't be part of the image. So usually I tend to take a bit more care with my line art, but I didn't feel that that was necessary this time. It was more about just getting the image in place and correcting things like the size and shape of these bolts on his leg, where the muscles are. Yeah, just making sure they are all where I needed them to be and that everything is in correct proportion. This is pretty much my last chance to make sure that everything's where I want it to be. So So here I've started on the female earth character. She was a lot easier than the electric character. I made a lot of changes with him, a lot of changes in proportion with him, and even after that liner I did make a few more changes after that, but I didn't need to do that with this character here. I did make some changes with her face later on because I didn't like the way her face turned out. You will definitely see the difference between how it comes up now and how it ends up later on. I really liked how her face looked in the sketch, and I just didn't quite get it working exactly the way I wanted it to in this image. Getting the feet right was a little bit challenging. I'm not that great with hands and feet, so I don't tend to worry too much about it when I do my paper sketches because I know I can correct it later on. And it always tends to come up a lot better when I drawing with my tablet on the computer. Those things seem to always work themselves out in the end somehow. You can actually see some of the composition in the background there. That was the next stage after the leaf design that I originally came up with. I then decided to move towards more of an asymmetrical design, and I did stick with it for a while, but in the end I didn't go with that design. So you'll get there'll be a bit of an explanation about how I ended up with my final composition a little bit later on, where you'll see the image that you can see in the background there. So I'm just about finished. Yeah, I've just finished the earth character and moving on to my fire character. Now her hair was a little bit tricky, but I think it really worked out. It was very tricky moving from the line art to the colour and still trying to keep those defined curls, but I think it worked out in the end. The good thing about line art is you can really make dark the areas you want to be, like the shadow to be really, really effective. So all those black areas were incorporated into my colouring later on. It just gave me an idea of where I needed it to be quite dark. So when that's blocked out in the line art stage, it makes that a lot easier. This character didn't take anywhere near as long as the other two, obviously. Well, she's a lot smaller, but also because her design, her body shape is so much more simplistic than the other two. I didn't find myself as concerned with getting her shape as perfect as the other two because she's more of an unrealistic body shape in comparison to the other two characters. Her hands were a lot simpler as well. As you can see, they're not very detailed at all and they don't need to be realistic. They made life a lot easier for me when it came down to the line art, and also with the colouring. I didn't have to worry too much about her hands and feet. Yeah, this flame later on is purely, none of that line art is showing up on the inside there, so I really don't know why I bothered putting it there in the first place, but like I said, it usually gives me an idea of where I want particular colours to be, so it does help. And yeah, putting the little smoky parts around her hair was the last part to that stage. So I do like the line art; it's quite fun actually.